I'm really happy once again to welcome Kentucky Senator Rand Paul to the podcast. Rand, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. Let me dive right into General Milley's testimony today, because we had gotten the impression from the Woodward book that Milley regarded Trump as being, out of control, and therefore he took two actions. One, essentially established a chain of command in which any nuclear decisions would have to go through him. And two, he called his counterpart in China, General Lee, and essentially said to him, listen, if there's any attack coming, I'm going to give you the heads up, and I'm also going to give you the heads up in the future. Now, today, General Milley kind of sung, if I may say so, a different tune as I heard it, in which he was saying basically, no, this is just a routine clarification of who's in charge. And I know that Trump isn't going to attack China. I was merely conveying that intention, the president's own intention, to my counterpart in China. Now, what do you make of this apparently new framing of the Milley story?
I think to get to the truth of the matter is difficult. Do we take him at face value, what he's saying now, or do we accept what the Woodward book is reporting as his point of view? Now, obviously, Woodward is, very good at gossip. So there's a lot of gossip in Washington. He wasn't privy to any of this. He's hearing it all secondhand. So I think you do have to take with a grain of salt the things that are in the Woodward book, because they are basically glorified gossip. But they're worrisome enough that Milley should be asked. And if Milley was working for me and I was president, I would have brought him in and I would have asked him to respond to questions under polygraph. Because I think the idea that he would actually go outside the chain of command and warn the Chinese that, if I'm going to prevent anything like a nuclear launch, that might happen from President Trump. By saying things like that, you could actually cause an accidental nuclear war, because you could have the Chinese then so jumpy that a civilian launch of a satellite or some sort of launch into space might be misinterpreted, because the general saying, wow, our president's such a loose cannon, he might attack you, but I'll try to stop him. That would be actually putting the Chinese into a position where they think, oh my goodness, anything launched into space might be an attack. It actually might set off an accidental nuclear war. Not to mention that in our country, it's very important that we have civilian control of our army and our military. So I was very worried by that report. But once again, everybody deserves a chance to defend themselves. I guess unless you're a lieutenant colonel and the military says you cannot question the chain of command with regard to the withdrawal in Afghanistan that was so catastrophic. So it seems to be sort of a different standard for General Milley than it is for the lieutenant colonel, who's being drummed out of the military now.
Let's turn to Afghanistan for a moment, because it seems now that General Milley, General McKenzie, it was the view of the top generals that the United States needed to manage this differently, that they did not agree with Biden's kind of precipitous, let's get out of there kind of overnight decision. Biden had said a little earlier that that he was not aware of anybody at the top brass giving him advice counter to what he in fact did. Do you think this is just a case where Biden's neurons are not on full firing and he just forgot that he had gotten this advice? Or do you think that that maybe he didn't get the advice somehow?
I think many of the generals at this level are very much political animals, and I do think that they're covering up for maybe one of the worst military decisions to come down in a lifetime. Evacuating Bagram Air Force Base before everyone had gotten out of the country was a terrible military blunder. I doubt that originated with civilians or with Biden. I'm thinking the decision to leave Bagram Air Force Base prematurely was purely a military one. And in the end, it may have cost the 13 lives, because they were trying to defend a municipal airport instead of trying to defend a military airport. The military airport, had reinforced concrete at the entryways, had a big, huge line of sight. You could keep people away. Guarding the municipal airport was a really, really rotten, bad decision. That, I think, it was made primarily by the military. And then in their haste, this may have come from Biden himself, but in their haste to save face over losing the 13 soldiers after making the terrible decision to leave the Air Force Base, they then launched a deadly missile strike on civilians. And I think that was done in haste to save face. and they acted in a rash manner without fully looking at the details. But I have a suspicion that may have come from all the way up to Biden, because during the Obama days, the drone strikes, he authorized every one of them individually. So it's not out of the question for the media to be asking Biden, did you specifically and personally approve the strike? I have a feeling he may well have.
What do you make, Rand, of this Marine Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller? This guy, apparently maybe a little rashly says, I'm demanding accountability from my superiors. Maybe he spoke out of turn, but apparently this guy's now in the brig. He's locked up awaiting trial. Meanwhile, all the top guys who managed this sort of absolute disaster, as you describe it, don't seem to be having any accountability. Are you disturbed by the fact that we're seeing accountability at the micro level for a guy who goes, what's going on, and no accountability for the very guys who blew it?
I think questioning the chain of command and questioning the wisdom of something is something you would want your junior officers to do. If we're going to put them in prison or dismiss them or court-martial them for questioning the decision-making, I think we'll have a lot less of people trying to get to the right solution and just being quiet because they're afraid of what will happen. Putting him in a brig, though, or putting him in a jail cell is an incredibly bad form. I think incredibly detrimental to morale in the military, and I think the wrong thing to do. If you say that you cannot say that in the military, my understanding is that you might resign your commission, you might leave the military because you're unable to accept that was good advice and you want to be able to criticize that. But putting somebody in jail for that, or court-martialing somebody, I think is inappropriate, and I think it's going to lead to a lot of loss of morale throughout the ranks of the military.
I mean, it seems there's a key difference between a guy countermanding a command and saying, I won't carry it out. That's not what this guy was doing. It was after the fact that I think he realized that the whole country can see this is an abject disaster. And he was just saying, who made these decisions? Who's accountable for it? And you're basically saying that in this circumstance, let's at least let the guy speak his mind and don't necessarily penalize him in this way for it.
Yeah, and it's an over-the-top kind of response, theatrical and bad theatrics, as far as I'm concerned, to actually put him in the brig. That is beyond the pale. A guy who served 17 years, a guy by all accounts and by all those who know him well, is a great patriot and loves his country, and did this at his own peril to his career to speak out. But I think he was so affected by 13 young men and women dying based on really, really terrible, rotten military decisions at the top. And there are complaints by a lot of officers in that level, lieutenant colonel, people who are saying the people rising to the top are not rising to the top because of skill. They're rising to the top because of political wokeness, because of left-wing politics, because of, by not having an original thought in their head the entire time they're there and not offending anyone, they rise to the top. But they may not be the best people to be making decisions when we have to actually be in a military or a warlike situation.
When we come back, I want to ask Senator Rand Paul about domestic politics and focus on the infrastructure bill.